the mystical and the occult path. How are they different? How do they contrast? And most importantly, for those of you who consider yourselves on the path of occult discipleship or pursuing the occult way, how do we bring these two into harmony and synthesis and consider them as two halves of one whole? So the mystical path really can be summed up as that connection to the heart and building the connection through the sutratma, which is the deepening of the heart center, the bringing forth of consciousness into matter through prayer, meditation, and most importantly for the heart center, sacrifice. The principle of sacrifice is very important when it comes to understanding the sutratma. And this is very beautifully articulated through the Piscean problem. And we spoke about it when we talked about Pisces. So if you haven't seen that, you want to learn more about this, that is where I would suggest to go first. But sacrifice of the personal desires, sacrifice of the personal life, choosing to opt for the Neptunian Christ collective, the love of the collective, the unity consciousness. So the mystical path, when we experience the mystical way, has a very emotional quality. We spoke about this with the sixth ray and Neptune. Neptune, being the sacred ruler of the sixth ray and connected to the solar plexus, guides that process of the lifting up out of the lower three centers in terms of the congregation of all of the emotional, personal, instinctual desires that come through consciousness being purely identified with the form aspect, the lower expression of consciousness, elevating all of those energies up, devoting, and devotion is an emotive quality, devoting to a cosmic or a spiritual principle. We elevate up into the heart, move into love, move into the desire to serve and connect and be one with our brothers and sisters and our environment, and to move into a path of love and service. Great exemplars of this are the Christian mystics or Sufi mystics, as well as esoteric Islam. And of course, the core of all religions, really, in terms of that religious experience, comes back to this mystical path of the heart, the opening through the heart there. That's the receiving of love. That is a very intimate and very, very personal experience, particularly that sixth ray Neptunian heart opening quality, because the personality is receiving consciousness. It is very, you can almost have an erotic quality when we open the heart, actually. It's that which, when we're projecting our desire for merging with the Godhead onto a romantic partner, when we have strong romantic projections, and that experience which is often awakened as we move into sexual maturity and adolescence, where we have intense or passionate dynamics, that's almost the psychological expression of that being projected out into the exoteric realm again, but that being elevated into what the true longing is, which is to be one with God, which is for the body to receive God. And so poets like Rumi, who write about the ecstatic experience, being driven mad by love, being driven wild by love, and the fire of love. This is all a quality of opening through the heart there. And to be a mystic has oftentimes been considered to be a bit crazy, and to be on fire with the love principle can look very, very crazy to people of ordinary, everyday consciousness. But the function of the mystical path is that it reorients the human being to be fundamentally driven from the heart, to drop out of fear and instinctual personal astral desire, or the limitation of the lower Saturnian concrete mind and this and that and all of the, let's say, the shadow expressions of Capricorn, for instance, into that alive experience of feeling. And it is a very feeling quality. In some sense, the mystical path is, we could consider it a very feminine process, even though so many of the mystics and saints that we know were men, probably more to do with the previous era of sexism that we've come out of, although we have plenty of female examples. with one of my favorites being Saint Teresa of Avila, a beautiful Christian saint and Christian mystic. It's feminine in that way that it requires the reception. It's receptive, right? When matter receives spirit, it's akin to a woman receiving the man. Let's say it's the matter principle, regardless of sex in this upper esoteric consideration. A man or woman receiving God or receiving soul, receiving Christ, or even a bolt of lightning from the monad when these are more intense variations of heart openings. So this expansion and deepening of the heart reveals the true core of the human being, which is to love, to receive that second ray impulse, and to move into a life lived in love. And here we have the wisdom of love and the choice to forgive or to extend the heart out onto others, even if it feels uncomfortable or is painful. So, yes, the Sutratma here, but what about the occult path, and how does it really utilize the mystical path for its purposes? And so with the occult path, we're talking about more of a refinement that happens where it becomes actually imperative to bring on the mental principle, which is a little bit of a tricky thing for some people to work with, because if you have had a very mystical experience, so much of the quality of that experience is led by the disillusionment of mind. It's a breaking out of mind into the heart. Often that is the experience, a breaking out of the ways in which the mind encrusts and encases and like limits the heart center, like the heart shuts down and we all go into our minds, and breaking out of that is very difficult, the concrete mind. And yet we have to then go through a process of rewiring the mind and then going, okay, if we're moving with the Christ or if we're moving with the soul, how then does the mind come into under that dominion? Because obviously the mind has this computer kind of precision that's capable with it, the ability to organize and structure and communicate, relay information, all of this. And even if you are a mystic and you're anti-mind, if you're transmitting that in any way, even if you're writing a poem, you're still utilizing the mind, of course, obviously, to communicate that. So the bringing in of the mental refinement and the purification of the head itself, of the mind, restructuring thought energy, dealing with the propensity towards negativity or judgment, all the ways in which the five senses, eyes, ears, particularly eyes and ears, and the hearing, the seeing, the speech, the way in which those faculties are still based in the 3D world, let's say, versus opening up those senses so that the brain can actually be receptive to those mercurial Buddhic impulses. And here we have the building of the Antakarana, Sutratma through the heart, like piercing of the emotional body with life force from the soul, versus the more subtle rainbow bridge, which is the way in which we forge the intuitive mind. And this becomes very important when we step into more mature levels of the path, where we have to become builders and we have to restructure things. It's a beautiful thing to go out and go, I'm a lover of God, and to run up to someone in the street and go, do you know that you are one with the universe and I love you, and to shock people awake and elevate people out of their suffering. That's a beautiful thing. But when we really look at it from a wider point of view, that has to be followed by a different conclusion, because once we wake up here, I am one with everything. Then what? Do we just sit there and worship God all the time, day and night, and just, praise be? Why are we here? Obviously, then just the logical progression of this process then comes to a point where we have to get into the building, we have to get into matter, and this is partly we're moving into the Aquarian age and bringing in seventh ray and matter, and awakening the principles of matter, and bringing in the Virgoic processes and the quickening and synthesizing, awakening the Divine Mother, and getting into things. And as we've just looked at Virgo bringing all the bodies into alignment, physical, emotional, and mental, okay, so that we can accurately express. So the occult path becomes one of the development of the mind in conjunction with everything else. Okay, it's not just mental, because the problem, which I've seen a lot of in the realm of esotericism and occultism is that you get mental types. And those are people that they may have a profound array of concrete knowledge, but they're not surrendered in the heart. And as a result of that, they have an excess of mental lower concrete knowledge, but not enough inspiration, not enough life force, not enough of the soul's penetration into the body to start really reorienting the body and the other aspects of the personality to start moving in alignment with God. So that's always my difficulty, where sometimes the mystics can have that trap of, all mental things are BS and you just got to surrender to Christ. But then you have the esotericist types that may have a lot of information that can be utilized practically, but they're unable to, they don't have the grit, they don't have the love enough, they don't have the passion, and just that sutratmic connection. They don't have enough life force literally pouring into their being to really push them and expand them and stretch them and mature them into that embodiment process that is required to actualize the soul's gifts and its potentials there. So we have to be able to blend the two, obviously. Venus has a lot to do with this, the blending of heart and mind, the bringing them together. In my video, Connecting to the Soul, I primarily focused on the heart. And that's always the place to start. I would always start there with someone. I guess it's a generalization. It really depends on the individual and where their point of development is. And these sorts of things would be revealed through certain difficulties and challenges in the life and other things that we could see in the natal chart, for instance, astrologically considered. But as a general statement, usually I focus on the development of the heart at the beginning to really develop the individual's connection to life as that pure source of energy and inspiration, developing a personal relationship, right? Because yes, the mind is all, it's a knowledge and it's technical, but the heart is where it becomes personal. Literally, the personal body, the astral, the physical body, the vehicle is being penetrated by God when we pull in through prayer and the devotional quality, and I just want to be able to serve, and none of this is necessarily about logic or detail. It's this feminine process of, well, it's not necessarily feminine even, but certainly to the degree that it's receiving, it's pulling in. We're trying to pull consciousness in. That is really important to bring in that oomph that's required to really kickstart things. So as occultists, it's really important that we check in and make sure that we have that connection to love or are fostering that, and we're not just doing the trap which can serve the, Tibetan says this as well, at a certain point knowledge is actually useless, and the ageless wisdom teachings and study can be detrimental even to certain individuals, to the degree that they're using the mental matrix of the concrete mind and absorbing all this information to limit themselves in a prison of the mind, where they're nice and safe. And I know all of these esoteric things, but I'm not living a life of love. I'm not surrendering or taking that plunge or willing to let go, because even temporarily, because of course eventually the mind has to come back into the picture anyway. But the full giving up of the dependency or the safety of the lower concrete mind and staying trapped in the personality self, rather than the big yes to life and the service and the renunciation and the sacrifice, and stepping into a very vulnerable and also very human experience, very tender place of feeling that compassion, the suffering, being sensitive to the suffering of humanity, being moved to tears through that process, through that contemplation, through seeing people suffer and getting to that point of crisis where it's just not enough to not love. There has to be such a deep, intimate, human, sensitive connection, that desire to unify with everyone, but with God, with the one at the center. So that is really important, and I'll always move to emphasize that, especially to the degree that you, as the frequent viewer, those of you out there, are interested or are more on, let's say, a third rate type astrology or study mental type, that it's really important that the intimacy and the vulnerability of the human experience as a gateway into receiving consciousness is met. That it's an Eastern phrase that says, the way to me, and this is Shiva talking, the consciousness or God principle, the way to me is through her, through matter. And in that meaning the humbling humus, being brought down to earth, to be humbled, humility, to meet all the pain, the universal grief that all human beings carry, because at the end of the day we are one, and there is a reality to what that revelation does to a person, and that is it cracks you open, because it's devastating. It's devastating to love, to touch love and then see how terrible things are where that love is not realized, and how it's not being expressed on the planet, and how we abuse the earth and each other as a result of that. It's absolutely gut-wrenching. And that point of entry, that the contacting that part of our human psychological experience is an important part, that suffering of opening this. And this helps mature us in terms of our sincerity, actually. Yeah, our sincerity and our true motivation behind our actions, not perfection from a lower mental idea, or not wanting to get power from the soul or power from God, but to love and to do whatever it takes to serve that love principle. And of course, across time, as that's anchored into place, then we can move into some of the specifics where we get a bit more refined in like how we actually meant to serve. But that core of the need to serve, and that comes from a very intimate and personal connection. And this is where the mystical path has to be at the heart, or at least at the baseline or at the core of movements, before we can move out into intelligence and intuition and getting a little bit more developed and refined in terms of how we seek to serve one another.